So my name is Itir Cole. I'm the director of product for Symphony, and I'll be talking to you about how we identified this problem, this challenge, and our proposed solution. Before I get started, Jackie made several references to this analogy of a shared language, and working with large volumes of data, you'll also recognize that a small misalignment in that data can create significant impact. And so it becomes an avalanche of a problem. And if we don't get the foundation right, then it becomes really challenging to reconcile data going forward. So let's look at one of the problems that we ran into. This is a real problem that we saw in our data. We anonymize, of course, some of the pieces here, but what you're seeing is on the left-hand side, you have the health plan, and on the right-hand side, you have the provider organization. So those are the two contracted entities, and Symphony sits right in the middle, facilitating that conversation between them. When we receive data from these two entities, right off the bat, we know something's off, because if you look at the total provider counts, provider organization 123 is saying, I have 1,649 providers for my contract with Health Plan A, and Health Plan A is saying, I have 1,072. So right off the bat, that total provider count is already missing, and Symphony is going to work to reconcile that difference. So now when the provider organization shares this data with us, all they tell us is, I have a contract with Health Plan A, and there are this many providers in that contract. However, on the health plan side, when we look at how they share the data with us, they tell us, yes, I have a contract with provider organization 123, and here's how I organize that data in my system. Right, so the health plan has defined these proprietary networks of how those providers line up. So to the provider organization, these networks are unfamiliar. This is not a shared language between them. And in fact, the provider organization may not even know how the health plan formed these networks. And so when we're working to reconcile the difference of the provider count or even the data at a more granular level, there isn't a one-to-one lineup between the two organizations. So it becomes a really large challenge. Let's look at another problem that's maybe slightly more complicated. Again, you have the two contracted entities on either side of the slide. You have Health Plan B and the provider organization 456. So now we have, we're trying to apply this Tier 3 network alignment definition, the shared language that we're developing, and that's the combination of plan type and line of business. So right off the bat, again, we're seeing a misalignment on the provider count. So for Health Plan B's commercial HMO, they're seeing 316 providers for their contract with Provider Org 456. Provider Org 456 is, however, seeing 445 providers, and that sort of cascades down all of the different networks. When provider organization shares this data with us, this is how they organize it. They tell us the contracted party and the plan type. They tell us for Health Plan A, for the EPO network, these are my providers. And on the health plan side, they again tell us, yes, I am contracted with this organization. However, I've broken them down into two separate entities in my system. One is PO 456 South. I'm making this regional distinction, and I'm also considering PO 456, a separate regional distinction. Yes, the same organization, but organized a little differently. On top of it, the health plan also gives us additional proprietary networks that they've defined. So they'll tell us these variations. When we're trying to reconcile, one, the provider count, but also the data for those providers between these two parties, it becomes a large challenge in that we can't line up the various networks. Right? There is no direct correlation between Health Plan B HMO and one of these. Like there could be overlaps, but there could also be gaps. So our definition of network alignment, this Tier 3 approach, is meant to cover this gap. So as we were studying the data, we wanted to come up with as universal a definition as we possibly could for a network. And this is what we have. So for contracted party, for the first component, it's really the name of the payer or the name of the provider organization, basically the party that you're contracted with. For a line of business, we have commercial, Medi-Cal, Medicare, dual beneficiary, covered California, and CalPERS. And for plan type, it's HMO, PPO, EPO, and POS. And something Jackie touched on earlier is that this concept of iteration, this is where our definition is now. Over time, as we access more data and study more of that data, we may expand these lists, but this is a good starting point to make sure that we are able to define a shared language between the two parties. And how we landed at tier 3, we started at the very top. We thought, does tier 1 give us enough information? Just knowing the other side of the contracted payer or the contracted party, is that enough information to line up the providers? And it wasn't. The two contracted parties kept missing each other. Then we brought it to the next level. We said, okay, how about if we added line of business to that? Is that enough information? And again, the two contracted parties kept missing each other. Tier 3 gave us the ideal alignment. It was contracted party, line of business, and plan type. It's doable, it's universal, it's standard, and it is the right language for us to choose. And we thought, well, how about if we took it one more level? Because we do see a need for one level more. Now, at that point, it became too proprietary. And again, the two contracted parties started to miss each other. And so we went back up and we stayed at the tier 3 level, moving forward with network alignment. So now let's look at how network alignment actually works in practice. So again, the two contracted parties on either side, Symphony is right in the middle facilitating that conversation. The first level of information we get from both sides is their contracted party. We can confirm that they're contracted with one another. The second level and the third level combined together are the lines of business and plan type. And now, if we were to look at what the data that's submitted, we may still have a mismatch in the counts, but suddenly the language that we speak makes it easier for us to reconcile those conflicts. So with the data we get and with the aligned network definitions, we can go back and tell Health Plan B, you're missing 45 providers, form your commercial HMO network with provider organization 456. Now, finding who those providers that are missing and validating that they actually are in those networks and we can reconcile the data across, it becomes much simpler, much easier.